Welcome to the Dental Business Guide podcast. From money to marketing to management, this podcast will help you run a better dental business.
Okay, welcome everybody here back to the Dental Business Guide podcast here with myself, Dr Mera, and Dr Smeeter Mera. So hi Smeeter, how are you doing today?
Hello, yeah, very well, thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me back.
So in this vein of us talking about DSOs and groups, I thought we'd do a podcast today about if you were going to start a DSO or group today, what would you do? So Smeeter, just give a quick background about who you are, what you do, and where you come from quickly, just for everyone's benefit, and then we can start answering some interesting questions.
Great, yes, thank you. I'm a dentist and I run a group, but I started back nearly 30 years ago, qualifying from the University of Birmingham. And now I'm in a position where I'm looking at helping DSOs grow, buy or sell. And yeah, the whole environment and canvas has changed so dramatically over certainly the last 22 years, which is when I started the first neem tree. And so, yeah, things have changed a lot. I think the biggest change I would say now is it's staffing. So trying to get really, really good members of staff and labour generally, whether they be clinicians or auxiliary staff and team, has sort of changed dramatically since COVID and certainly since Brexit. So with that in mind, if I were to start up a new group today, I would make sure that the surgeries or the practices are very much close in proximity to one another, as opposed to 22 years ago. I wouldn't have minded if one was in Scotland and one was in Newcastle and one was in Norfolk. It wouldn't have really mattered to me, but now definitely the geography matters.
So on that note, so thank you for sharing that. So your non-negotiable when you're starting if you were starting a group today would be what? Geography?
Yeah, geography of the practices. Either if, like me, you like opening squats, or if you're taking over a group, just try and make sure that the locations of the practices are close to each other, because you can share so many things, not just obviously staff, etc., but you can share team members. Like the practices I'm in at the moment, we've got somebody off at the moment, and we're borrowing somebody from the other clinic, and that's not a problem because they're just half an hour away from each other. But if they were 5 hours away from each other, you wouldn't be able to do that. So, and that becomes so much more cost effective and efficient, because then instead of taking on 2 full-time members of staff or 3 full-time members of staff, you might get 2 and then 1 part-time, and so the cost starts to make sense as well. Not only that, you've got things like specialists that you can easily share when the geography is common. Again, that would be a lot harder if they had to travel 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. You'd have to pick new people. And the other thing is geography matters. You don't want to be buying or setting up in a place where it's so remote that trying to staff it is very difficult. If you're taking over an existing practice in a remote area, you might think, great, because you've got full monopoly because there are no other practices there. That's brilliant. But when you're trying to then recruit for a changeover or handover of staff, you might not have many people wanting to relocate there or living there in order to work for you. So just these geography, in other words, is very important.
So right now we're seeing a real flight to quality kind of in the DSO market now. So if it was a new group, how do you balance, I suppose, the need for rapid growth with the kind of boutique clinical excellence you've always championed at the Neem Tree? How would you advise people to do that? What should be their focus?
Well, for me, it is, and this is obviously just personal, the boutique side of things and the private side of things have always trumped the rapid growth. I always, even back in the day, never wanted to have a group that was, 50, 60, 100 in size. It was always 5 to 10 clinics, really good, high end, good quality, and, selling, I suppose, the vision of dentistry that in my opinion was what the patients deserved. So it depends on what your business model is, but certainly in my case, I definitely believe that quality trumps quantity. You can still grow a group, but it can be a small group but high quality and earning just as well for you. You could grow the number of chairs in each clinic, which obviously you've got to look at the square footage of the place you're in and the ability to grow when you take over a practice or when you're setting up a squat. So as long as it's in a really great location, then you can grow that, no problem. It doesn't have to be the number of clinics, it can be the number of chairs, but quality definitely over quantity.
Okay, so on that note, so if we look at the current environment today, as an individual, you go to a hospital today and you go to an NHS hospital and your normal care is you're waiting for quite a while, could be a number of hours, and I suppose patients are used to that kind of mindset in the NHS world. But now, if you were going down the route of, as you've done, in private clinics, private care, how does a new group design a patient journey that actually feels like an oasis rather than a clinical assembly line like you might feel when you go to an NHS clinic or an NHS hospital?
Well, like everything, I think it's all about the quality and the small touches. It's about the front of house, and the first port of call has to be top notch. It's customer service or patient care. You've got to have a bright, smiley face at the front desk, a very cheery voice on the phone. That's where it all starts. Their first point of contact has to be, quite a sort of wow service, and then little touches within the clinic or little touches within reception, a nice environment, a bright environment, fresh environment, regularly changed, redecorated, is what it takes, so that a patient comes in and feels like they want to take a deep breath as opposed to hunch up their shoulders with worry because the phone's constantly ringing and it sounds like intensive care. So these sorts of things matter, but again, it depends on your what sort of your ethos is within the practice. These little things where the patient is treated like a VVIP is what matters, and that can be in a wide variety of different clinical settings and non-clinical settings. The bottom line is the patient has to be on top of your list and on top of your wish list of who to treat really, really well, and then the rest follows.
Okay, all right. So you've always said location is an important aspect in dentistry, okay, as you mentioned that earlier. Now we're in a world of remote work and changing city centres. In your mind, someone who's been doing this for so long, what does the ideal 2026 location look like for someone who wanted to build a multi-site group? Because remember, patients work from home a lot more now, okay? You had a clinic many years ago in Canary Wharf, right in the heart of the financial district. Would you open up one there again? Just wondering what your thoughts were.
Really good question. I think the main kind of drastic shift in my mindset with regards to thinking about this, it has to have been COVID. I think prior to COVID, there was the life before COVID, BC, and life after COVID, AC. So I think before COVID, obviously the high footfall, central city, London, for example, locations were key, where everybody went to work and they saw you at work, and that was very visible centres and high footfall. I think after COVID, the big change has been, for me, the answer to this question would be still a high density population, but somewhere that's got a high residential population, and still maybe a nice village street or a nice town street, probably not in central London or centre of the city, wherever you are in the country, but somewhere suburban where, as I say, there's a high density but more residential, and definitely somewhere close to a supermarket. We all know the power of the supermarket back in COVID. That never stopped, even for a single day. So that has changed. In other words, high density but a residential, but still a kind of affluent population. But that's just my business model.
So people have to eat at the end of the day, as you said. They need to go to a supermarket.
Correct. And that will never stop. So, yes.
Okay. So now, as you mentioned earlier, staffing clinics is a massive hurdle still in this industry. So if you were building a team from scratch today, how would you structure the practice culture to ensure that you're the employer of choice so people would choose you?
Well, I guess, again, since COVID, things have changed a lot, and Brexit, because there's been so much movement of labour, to Europe and beyond. And so I think that the sort of people that are now looking for jobs, certainly auxiliary team members, they have got used to this kind of hybrid working pattern. And even though within the dental industry, that's not really been a possibility, far less than other industries anyway, people sort of have that expectation. So if you want to be an ideal employer, if you can either, instead of, let's say, having 2 or 3 or 4 full-time members of staff, what you might do is do split shift. So you might have some people who want to work mornings and they want to get home for their children, etc. And that's fine. If your business can allow that, then why not? Why not listen to the sort of labor demands, I suppose, that are out there right now? And others, for example, they might have other issues going on in the morning, but they can do the afternoon, evening. They can't get to you in rush hour, so you can then offer them a split shift, and they can do afternoon, evenings, or you get separate members of staff at the weekend. It's a little bit more of a hassle, but it certainly can be done where you're listening to the demands and needs of your team members, but still running a viable business whereby everyone's a winner, I guess.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I suppose now let's move on to something more kind of financially orientated, I suppose, with my hat on. Now, in the DSO playbook, we talk about EBITDA and the predictability of EBITDA above all else, okay, for groups to focus on in terms of profitability for valuation purposes. But from your perspective as a clinician, okay, and this is sometimes where it gets lost in the translation by many investors, is that ultimately EBITDA is important, but what do you measure instead? Okay, what are the metrics that makes you know or makes you happy that, okay, my clinics, if we get that right, the EBITDA will follow anyway? Okay, so from a clinician's point of view, what's the most important?
Yeah, I get the question, and I think it's obviously EBITDA is very, very valuable, certainly when you're looking at your business as an asset, and certainly when you're looking to buy and sell. But from a pure clinical point of view, I suppose, now when I look at the practice, I suppose my measure of success are full books, because the practices are mature enough to be looking at recall appointments, i.e., the quality of your dentist that you have, in my case associate dentists, are measured at the 6-month stage or the 3-month stage or whenever they recall their patients. If the patients want to come back and see them and agree to booking that at the time that they treatment complete or they finish their last course of treatment, then that to me is a real measure of success, and that I've got my team right, and the customer service is right, and everything we're doing is aligning. If, however, they see these dentists or clinicians or hygienists and they sort of don't book back, and you've got empty books in 3 months or in 6 months or whenever, or even next week, and everything else is equal. In other words, the financial situation of the country is okay, and there are no tsunamis, or there's no COVID, or there's nothing else. If everything else is equal, then to me, full books and good comments and good reviews are a real measure of success.
Okay, that's very, very interesting, because me from an accountant's perspective is valuation and EBITDA. You from a clinical perspective is the chair occupancy ultimately and positive comments.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Happy patients at the end of the day. If you've got happy customers, happy patients, you've got a really good, viable and successful business.
Correct. And that translates ultimately into
EBITDA,
profitability.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So you've over the years set up multiple practices across the kind of southeast and London area. What is the one mistake you made in the early days that you would be most careful to avoid if you started another practice tomorrow?
If I were to open up a squat again tomorrow, I think that the biggest mistake I made right at the beginning was just going with one provider for everything, not having the knowledge, being very green, not sort of getting the best of 3 quotes in anything really, and as a result, like many others, you tend to get ripped off. I don't think I'd make that mistake again now, because I've got my little black book of everything from electricians to chair providers to sundries, and also specialists. So I'd like to think I wouldn't be making that mistake again, but I've made plenty of mistakes across the years.
Sure. I suppose a closing question here on this short podcast today is, we have lots of listeners who are young dental associates, not just here in the UK, but all over the world, male, female. If you had to give a 60-second elevator pitch who wants to start their own practice or even their own group today, what would your golden rule be?
Great. That's being put on the spot. I think my elevator speech today would be, let's say, I wouldn't say I was a specialist, but my sort of pet passion is squat practices. So I suppose my pitch would be more related to the squat practices. And things have changed so dramatically over the last 22 years. For example, the whole E-class planning permission has changed the whole landscape of opening up squats. Back in the day, it was D1 planning. And, we fought long and hard to get D1 planning status for certainly the 5 clinics that we looked to open, which were anything from architectural offices to laundrettes to basement car parks and so on and so forth. And there was such a joy in actually converting them, but it was a bit of a battle to try and get that planning permission. Nowadays, you don't have to worry about any of that, as a result of which many, many more young dentists have sort of joined the force, as it were, to open up squat practices on busy high streets. What that has done, though, is it has flooded the market with providers, and that has its own problems with competition and so on and so forth, which is not, competition's never a bad thing, but a little bit of experience with sort of handling practices and business does go a long way. So good and bad has happened over the last 22 years, but like I suppose my advice was then is exactly the same now. It's all about location, location, location.
And then one final question to kind of just get your thoughts on is, when we started these group many years ago, back in 2002, 2003, okay, we were fresh-faced, kind of naive, not really sure, thinking, okay, we can start a group up. And you saw the groups of other industries like coffee shops like Starbucks or Costa, and we thought, well, maybe we could mirror that. But the reality is that running dental clinics is very, very different to running a franchise coffee chain or whatever it like, as I just mentioned. Okay, so, and we've seen many groups emerge over the years, but struggle really with keeping the soul of the practices alive whilst they try to scale. So, from your perspective, how do you suggest people keep the soul of the practices alive whilst they try to scale? I don't think I've seen many people do that particularly well, but I've seen that worked well in the Neem Tree when you got to a size of about 5 clinics. But going beyond that, it gets even harder. What would your advice and thoughts be on this point?
I think you're absolutely right. The difference between a coffee shop and a dental practice is very, very difficult, because I suppose a coffee shop or a chain of shops like, I don't know, H&M or Marks and Spencer, etc., they all are product based. And I suppose if you've got the general culture or staff ethos or customer service, then you're kind of onto a bit of a winner, because what you're trying to sell is the same product. You've just got to look after your customers and how you sell it to them, or how you market it, or how you label it. But in a dental practice, it's all about the service, and it's a need and want based industry. But patients really, really rank their dentist based on the care levels and their personalities. In other words, the dentist's personality or the clinician's personalities, as well as front of house and nurses, of course. So I think, yes, getting to, let's say, 5 clinics is doable, I suppose, because you can try and translate that culture across the board. But getting beyond that is very, very hard, unless you've got a sort of owner-operated person within each clinic, or heavily incentivized, let's say, clinician, or somebody who's got shares or some other financial incentive for the clinic to do really, really well. If that's the case, then the clinic has a chance of translating that vision across the board. But if not, then it becomes very, very difficult as you scale and grow, because then it starts to become about the numbers and less about the ethos.
Very interesting, Smeet. Well, thank you very much today for sharing your insights and your experiences. So this is Arun Mera, and we've had Dr Smeeter Mera talking.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem at all. On topics surrounding DSOs. And watch out for our next podcast soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening in to the Dental Business Guide podcast. We welcome your feedback, and if you're enjoying it, please let your friends know too. Until the next time on the Dental Business Guide podcast.